Well, welcome listeners to episode 79 of the Mail-Right Real Estate Agent Podcast Show. And today we have an amazing guest. His name is Mark Walker with Luxmana Investments. And we're going to dive into some tips and tricks and good information about real estate investing. I want to let Mark introduce himself right now. So Mark, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here. I escaped the rat race in January of 2015. Prior to that, I worked for almost 14 years for a high-tech company while I was part-time investing in real estate. And after leaving the rat race, I ended up buying a 64-unit apartment complex. So now going forward, my biggest focus has been multifamily and really just growing my business in that area of commercial real estate.
Awesome, Mark. Thanks for being here today. We'll get into your story and some of the information you're going to provide in just a minute. I want to turn things over to my illustrious co-host, Mr. Jonathan Denwood. Jonathan, will you introduce yourself?
I love that, illustrious. You keep saying that, Thomas. You just keep saying that. Hi, folks. I'm the founder of Mail-Right. We're a online internet service that helps you market yourself to your biggest resource. They're the people that actually can recognize you in your local community. And we specialize in offering a number of services around Facebook.
All right. And I'm Thomas J. Nelson. I put people in the largest amount of debt of their lives, but they thank me for it because I'm their residential realtor here in San Diego. And I too was an investor turned realtor, did some investing in the Bay Area before I got into residential real estate. And you can find me on thomasjnelsonrealtor.com plus all social media. All right, well, let's get into our interview with Mark. Mark, I wanted to first point out that you invest not only in your home state of Colorado, correct, but in 3 other states. So my first question is, how did you get into out-of-state investing and past the normal fears that people have about out-of-area investing?
Yeah, great question. I think what led me to invest in out of state, the motivation was that Colorado has turned into a seller's market. And, we've probably heard about it in the national news. We're getting compared here in Colorado to coastal towns, like San Diego, San Francisco. Right. The prices here have just gone crazy, and that's very much supply driven. That phenomena really started in late 2014. And it's been crazy ever since. And so I had to turn out of state because I was able to find better deals out there. I also ended up investing in one state because I bought some tax liens there a few years ago. So that one was kind of by accident, but really what led me out of state where I'm most active, that's Texas, is that phenomena here in Colorado, and just, needing to go out and find good deals. But I'll say that, as I approached going out of state, I really leaned very heavily on systems. I have always been a systems guy. I believe that, before you go making any investments, you have to start networking and finding the right people and systems. So specifically a good property management company. Yep. A good property management company is also plugged in extremely well throughout their locale as well. So you're able to lean on them as well to find lenders and insurance providers and, brokers, things like that as well.
Awesome. Before we get into too much detail, I wanted to kind of go into some basics of investing because I don't know about you out there, but I run into investors all the time here and they're fresh out of a weekend seminar and now all of a sudden they're an investor.
Right.
And so there's some things that we consider before we buy a property, things like capitalization, cap rate analysis, cash on cash. Could you go into each of those terms and just kind of what's involved in assessing a property?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I agree with you, knowing your acquisition criteria and sticking to your acquisition criteria is extremely important to an investor. It separates successful investors from unsuccessful ones for sure. Things that I look for when in the residential space, when I was buying a bunch of residential stuff, the only one I cared about was cash on cash return.
Right.
Some people look at cap rate with residential stuff, but I didn't care so much about that, mainly because of how those types of properties are valued.
Right.
So I looked at cash on cash return. Now, the best way I can explain cash on cash return is imagine if you put $100,000 in the bank, right, in a savings account. By today's rates, you'd be lucky to get 0.5%, you know, on that. So that basically means on a $100,000 deposit, you're going to get about $500 a year in interest, you know, off of that deposit. Cash on cash return is the same concept. How much of my cash outlay am I going to recover in the first year? And so my very first real estate deal was back in 2004. I bought a duplex in South Denver. That property had a 36.5% cash on cash return in the first year.
Wow.
So imagine if I had invested $100,000, just to keep the numbers simple.
Right.
I would have gotten $36,500 back in the first year. Definitely beats the bank, doesn't it?
That does.
Yeah. Now that I'm in the multifamily space, I do care about cap rate. So I do look at cash on cash return. I usually like to see cash on cash return in the double digits, you know, at least 10% or greater in the first year.
Right.
And then, you know, cap rates, I usually use that to determine, you know, my going in cap rate. So what is it based on the actual financials when I buy the property? And most importantly, I use that same cap rate assumption to, you know, determine, you know, what could my property be worth, you know, if I'm successful in, you know, raising the net operating income of the property.
Okay. And then, you know, you mentioned you're doing multifamily now. So are you looking for underperforming properties, or what are you targeting when you're doing multifamily?
Yeah, you know, I'll preface this by saying there are so many different ways to make money in real estate in general, right?
Yeah.
I love multifamily. Even in the multifamily space, there's lots of different strategies. What I like to do, though, is yes, I like to go in and find properties that are distressed. Either they have a whole bunch of deferred maintenance,
Right.
or maybe they've been operated, you know, poorly is a harsh word, but maybe less than their potential. They have below market rates. Maybe they're not billing back for utilities yet,
Right.
you know, things like that. So I can go in and I can unlock value in a number of ways by addressing the deferred maintenance, by renovating the units, by, you know, improving the operations, you know, of the property, like billing back for utilities, maybe implementing water conservation, you know, as well, you know, things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's important. You know, I can remember fixing up one of my rehabs that we turned into a buy and hold. And I can remember the neighbors going, "Why are you putting so much money into this house?" You know, it was in a, you know, kind of a rougher neighborhood, but up and coming. We saw the trend coming because of supply and demand. And year after year, whenever we had to re-rent that property, the neighbors would say, "You're asking way too much for that." And I go, "I'm getting it." But I'm getting it because they're walking into a new kitchen and new systems and, you know, new bathroom, not the status quo of the neighborhood, which is where you have a lot of slumlords, essentially, you know, trying to put as
Right.
little into the property as they can. So, I mean, what's your, it sounds like we think alike in that realm, but specifically, what is your philosophy and what do you actually do when you go in and rehab a property?
Well, you know, every property is different, but in general, usually where we're going to see the best rent pops is by renovating the units, oftentimes replacing appliances.
Right.
In fact, the 64-unit property that I bought most recently, every single appliance on the property was at least 20 years old.
Wow.
And, you know, I knew from doing comps, you know, rent comps from, you know, other properties in the area that simply upgrading the appliances, if I did nothing else, that was worth an extra $50 per month in rent.
Yeah.
Of course, that wasn't all that I did. I went in and, you know, replaced all of the plumbing fixtures, replaced the lighting fixtures and things like that. You know, did a nice flooring and, you know, paint combination, things like that. Just really gave the units an overall facelift. Spent about $3,500 per unit, you know, to renovate them, to give them a little bit of a facelift. And that seems rather low, but, you know, on properties like this where, you know, you're going in and doing 1-bedroom and small 2-bedroom units, it's just, there's just not a whole lot you have to do, you know. And I was able to raise rents anywhere from $125 on the low end to, up to about, $200 per unit after doing that finish to that property. And, that's a pretty good return, especially on the appliances.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me ask you this, because you just mentioned something that's when I find a property that's underperforming, one of the number one things is they haven't raised the rent in eons, and there's a fear of doing that on a regular basis. Can you speak on that a little? Because I mean, you're going into properties with potentially a lot of existing tenants, and I think the average person would be afraid to lose those tenants. But talk about the tenants that come in and replace them when you do an upgrade on a property like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? I think we've all heard, investors or wannabe investors say that they love properties that the tenants have been there for like 10 years. They've had long-term tenants. In fact, I've even seen that in the marketing of some properties. Whenever I see that, all I see is dollar signs, because I know that there's going to be upside in that property because they haven't raised the rents, and the truth is that any savvy investor is going to be targeting a property in an area that has housing shortages. So if you're doing that, then there's nothing to be afraid of in terms of tenant turnover, because either your existing tenant is going to realize that they can't find a cheaper place, or you're just going to have 10 more people at the door, wanting to get in as soon as they leave. It's just something that, if you've done your homework, if you know what other properties around you are charging for rent and what amenities they're providing, you can very easily comp it out, and know how much rent you should be or could be getting, so.
It's a very good point. I can remember when I was going in and rehabbing properties and raising rents, and tenants saying, well, I'm going to move out. And it's that research that I knew that either they weren't, or if they did, just like you said, there's 10 better qualified people ready to rent that place. And sure enough, they would go do their due diligence when they were threatening to leave, and they'd call me back and say, you know what, we've decided to stay.
Yeah. And you know what, kind of along those lines too, one thing that my management company in Texas did that was a great idea. I wish I could take credit for the idea, but it wasn't mine. It's something that they just do. They would, invite all of the people that were up for renewal in the next month or two.
Okay.
On like a Saturday afternoon, or for like lunchtime or something like that, to a renewal party. And they would bring them to the office, and they would show them a sample of the carpet that they would get, and, or the backsplash. We did some backsplashes in the kitchen and stuff like that. They actually show them the tile, and stuff like that they'd show them what the appliances looked like that they'd be getting. And they would also, and this is where I thought it was really creative, they already had shopped the comps. And they literally would hand them a piece of paper that would say, here's what the property down the road is charging, and here's the finish you're going to get there. And then they'd also even factor in the price of a moving truck. And by the way, you're going to have to pay this much money for a moving truck.
Right.
And they would literally say, it just really makes sense for you to stay at the new market rate. Yeah. That's and again, if a tenant's willing to pay the new market rate, of course, by all means, they should stay. Right. But if they're not, then I really do believe that you're better off just opening up the door to someone else and getting the higher rent that you know your property's worth.
Can I ask a question, Mark? You talk about these properties, but if you got any tips or insights about avoiding, like in Britain, there was a period where people invested in property and it had investors in it, and they had to pay, enormous amounts of money to have that asbestos removed from the ceilings, or there's some structural, because you're talking about appliances, decorative improvement, but if you buy a property that's got substantial problems, you could be really financially really hit very badly. So how do you avoid getting a property that isn't, you're not talking about cosmetic improvements?
Yeah. Well, definitely you want to do your due diligence when you look to acquire the property. do all of your on-site inspections, your physical inspections, and things like that. Obviously, when it comes to things like asbestos and things like that, you want to your most ideal situation is going to be to only don't make any structural changes. In other words, don't plan on tearing down walls or anything like that, right? Because if there is asbestos or something like that present, that's where it can get really expensive. If you disturb it, then you obviously have to take the appropriate steps. And the other thing is too that when doing your on-site inspection and doing your CapEx budget for the first year, you really want to budget for the unknown, for any possible unknowns as well. I usually set aside 15 to 20% of my CapEx budget in the first year, just for things that I may not know about. Great example with my 64 unit, my pool. The pool on the property was in fine condition. The inspection came back good on it, but the city came in after the fact, and they decided that they wanted me to replaster the pool. Well, that should have cost $6,000 or $7,000. Once you start peeling one thing back, you find another that turned into about a $15,000 event. Unfortunate, but you know what? I was prepared for it. I had money set aside for other deferred maintenance or other unknowns, that I didn't anticipate in that first year.
That's a great point you just made, Mark. And that's something that I noticed, like when I get investors coming to me to want to buy and hold or fix and flip properties, they don't have, and mostly for the buy and hold, they don't have that budget set aside, not only for the unknowns, but for the ongoing. Part of the cap rate analysis I'll do for them includes a monthly maintenance percentage. And they always ask, well, what's that for? And, and I talk about, having it socked away. It's not that you're going to use it every month, but when that new roof needs to come in December, when you're not expecting it right before Christmas, it's nice to have that money set aside, isn't it?
It sure is. And this is one of the things that I love about multifamily as well, is that the lenders are, pretty sophisticated. They actually even require you to, have reserve for them to escrow reserves for you.
Okay.
And they do a property condition assessment of their own, as part of their underwriting process. And they literally come in and they determine how much useful life is left on some of the things like the roof, and the HVAC systems and things like that. And they actually have a company come in and do an analysis to say, okay, 5 years from now, you're going to need to replace the, half of the HVACs. And in 10 years, you're going to need to replace the roof. And they actually build a CapEx schedule around that. And then that's how they determine how much you need to be reserving.
Wow, that's a fantastic service. I've only dealt in 4 units or less, so I've never gotten to that level of investing. But that's great to know. That's a good practice for everyone to employ in their investing practices.
It's just a good discipline, and I completely agree with you. That's where a lot of investors go wrong, is they go in undercapitalized.
Yep.
And I see it all the time. It sounds like you do as well. The best thing you can do is, just make sure you have enough capital, to do what that property needs. Don't get to a position where you're trying to convince yourself that a deal looks good,
Right.
So
it's getting back to your advice earlier, sticking to your plan.
Yes.
That's the whole point of the plan. If it doesn't meet the numbers, you got to walk away. You can't square peg a round hole on these things.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Jonathan, I know I'm Mark speaking my language, so I don't want to dominate the conversation here. Do you want to jump in with any questions?
Well, yeah, you say the right deals, but I've been in periods where I've had friends looking and there are no good deals. But I suppose you covered that in your experience in Denver, because you're saying at the present moment, there might be one that comes up, but in general, there are no real logical good deals in Denver, and that's why you've moved to other markets. So I suppose you've really covered that, Mark, really, haven't you?
Yeah. At the same time, though, if I wanted to add, I've fiddled with the idea of maybe expanding into one more market. I haven't done it yet. As long as I can find, deals down in Texas, I might as well keep doing those. But if I was to go beyond maybe one more market, I'd have to clone myself. So, unfortunately too, I'm just not, I don't feel like I'm desperate for a deal. As we were talking about, I know my acquisition criteria. I'm going to stick to it. It's typically too, I'm more of a conservative investor. I'm not just looking for a deal. I'm looking for the deal.
Right.
And so, again, it's a discipline, just like setting money aside, making sure you're well capitalized. It's a discipline too, and sticking to your acquisition criteria, not being desperate for a deal. And, if you know how to look for them, there's deals out there to be found. You just have to be patient and know how to look for them.
So we got about 5 minutes before we go for our break, folks. But so you said, finding these deals, there's ways. So I presume that you rely on a network of professionals, real estate agents, other people that know you and feed you possible deals. Is that correct? And how did you develop this network, Mark?
Yeah, in Denver, it was very much the case. And it's funny too, this just goes to show, the power of networking. Many years ago, back in 2010, I did a couple of small development deals with a builder. We scraped some single family homes in Denver and raised up, a couple 3-story duplexes in their place. Oh, he actually introduced me to my lender, who I ended up doing a bunch of business with. My lender ended up introducing me to what I call a power broker, someone that just knew how to speak the language, was an investor himself. And I think that's incredibly important. That's something I really, give a lot of credit to. People that are brokers or in the business that are also investors themselves, that have walked in your shoes as an investor. That's huge. My lender also introduced me to a property manager, which has obviously led to a very fruitful relationship. So, that's how I went about, it was just through networking and doing business with people and, developing trust for each other that, I ended up, meeting and doing business with some really amazing people. But, I met a power broker early on. That was able to find me a number of deals that matched my acquisition criteria. And, now today too, in the commercial space and multifamily, yes, I do, make sure to reach out to brokers and make sure they understand what my acquisition criteria is. But I actually pick up the phone and I call other owners as well. And if nothing else, just to develop a relationship and to bounce ideas off of and stuff like that. And, they're, at the same time too, if they're ever in a position where they're ready to sell, maybe move up to a larger asset or do something different, then they think of me. They know that I'm in acquisition mode. And, perhaps we look at doing a deal principal to principal.
Oh, that's great. I think we'll go for our first break, folks, and when we come back, my co-host Thomas will grill Mark a little bit more. So we're going for a break, folks. We'll be back in a minute. We're coming back, folks. We're talking to Mark, a highly successful investor in real estate. I think it's a fascinating conversation. Got another question, Thomas?
Sure. Well, I'll start the question with a comment. I got into investing through my family. That's how my exposure to real estate really came about, was being a property manager and then getting into my own investments at the encouragement of my grandparents and my parents. And so, I agree with what you were saying, Mark, that it's not every realtor that can work with an investor, because if you haven't gone through a house and done a rehab, or gone through the challenges that sometimes your eagerness and mistakes teach you, and things like that, you've gotten dirty in a house and you've had to postpone remodeling your kitchen in your home so you can remodel the kitchen in your buy and hold, so that you can get a better tenant in there, and then have your wife be patient with that and things like that. You understand what these guys are going through. It's not about commissions. It's about the math and making it work for both of you. And so the question I'm getting at is, can you talk about the relationships you've established with these, with this power broker or with other agents that bring you deals? How do you structure the deal between the two of you?
You know, there's a million and one different ways to structure something like that. In the case of the power broker, where he was finding me a bunch of residential stuff, it was just a standard brokerage agreement,
Okay.
you know, that we had. But you know, there's lots of different ways too. I know he had other clients that, you know, actually he partnered with on deals. You know, he had equity stakes in the properties that he found for other people that were able to bring the money. You know, and so, you know, that's another way to do it. And, you know, especially in a market like today, I would say that, you know, if you want to, you know, give yourself a leg up and get yourself more of a broker's time and attention, you might look at, you know, forming those types of partnerships. You know, because, you know, that broker obviously dedicates their time to finding deals. And if you want them to think of you when they find one, or even a really good one, then there might be another way to incent them other than just, you know, their standard commission. Maybe you can give them a slice of the equity, you know, or partner, you know, in some other way, or guarantee them the sale. You know, when you decide to exit that property, you know, give them the sale, you know, when you decide to sell that as well. So.
Yep. And those are all great points, because that's exactly the different kinds of incentives that the investors that come to me today and view me as a residential realtor, you know, and the ones that grab my attention, that get me to call them when I've got a property that may be less than desirable for the general public, but it's, you know, it's low-hanging fruit for an investor. It's the ones that stay in touch with me on a regular basis, that they're not just there when I have a listing, and, you know, because you get 50 real investors out of the woodwork when you have a rehab property on the market. But it's those in between times, who's staying in touch, who's keeping me top of mind, and who stays top of mind for me. So, you know, I think what you're touching on is the relationships you build. And it sounds like you've got this main one, but obviously he's or she's a broker in one particular area. How have you reached out into the other states you're in, not only with your brokers, but with the property management companies you work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I answer, I want to tack on to something you said, because I think, you know, the importance of keeping in touch. I really agree with that, because, you know, I even remember when I first made contact with the power broker in Denver, we decided to meet for lunch. And the first thing he asked me is, why do you want to start investing in real estate or rental properties? You know, I mean, it's like he was grilling me, because he was like trying to figure out if I was for real.
Right.
And I think the thing that made him realize I was real is I said, I don't want to just buy one. I want to buy 10 in the first year. And he realized, you know, and I said, because if something goes wrong with one property, then my entire portfolio is doing horribly.
Right.
Whereas, you know, if you have 10, you can, you know, you're more diversified. And so, you know, I think too that, and, you know, networking and keeping in touch and staying top of mind for him was huge. But as I expanded into Texas, the advantage that I had is I have a cousin that's a 30-year veteran in multifamily. And he's very well established in Texas.
Okay.
But you know what? It works just the same.
Right.
It works just the same. You know, you've got to keep in touch. You've got to, you know, constantly be bouncing ideas off of each other, sharing what you're working on. You know, because as you talk about your successes and even your failures, you know, the things you're learning and, you know, the direction you're going, you know, people are just going to think of you, you know, and they're going to know that you're the real thing. You know, and you even talked about people coming fresh out of conferences. You know, you mentioned that early on.
Right.
It's so true. I mean, there are so many people that come out of a conference or a you know, some boot camp or something like that, and they're just guns a-blazing, you know. And you know, I hate to say this, if there's anyone that's listening that this is you, you know, probably 80-90% of the people coming out of those are never going to do a deal.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to get to your first deal, and you've got to get your first deal done. And the reality is that if you're new, you need other people to help make that happen. people like yourself, Thomas, you know, and others that have been through the process and have the network and the capabilities to do that.
No, it's a good point, because I mean, they don't give out awards for doing it on your own.
That's right.
And so you might as well get help. And
That's right.
and you know, you're going to have to pull a few weeds before you find a rose in the garden there when you're looking for the right fit, the right relationship. So because you know, there are so many people calling themselves investors, and so if you are, okay, let's see your track record. Show me some of the properties you've worked on, or show me some of the properties you manage. You know, ask questions, do some due diligence. I hate to sound pessimistic, but because of the world we are in now versus, you know, almost 30 years ago when I got started, you really can't take people just at face value. You have to do some due diligence on what they've been up to.
So, Mark, you know, let's say you're looking at the multifamily market, you are an investor, but this is your first go. This is a very broad question. You might not be, because it depends on what area, but let's take Texas. Let's say you're looking to buy your first multifamily property in Texas where you have some experience. What kind of price and what kind of financial resources would you recommend people would need to enter that market?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is, you know, start building a network, you know, in Texas, if that's your desire, right? Because, and depending on what locale you want to be in, if you want to be in Dallas, you know, versus maybe one of the secondary markets or something like that, a property manager is going to be able to give you a very, very clear idea as to, you know, what your, you know, what prices you need to target, what types of amenities are going to result in the highest rent, you know, who the best brokers are in the area, the best lenders, things like that. Now in Dallas, Dallas is at a point where I target C-class deals and B-class areas. That's typically going to be around $60,000 to $70,000 per unit in multifamily. And, you know, it's funny because, you know, just a few years ago, you could find deals for $30,000, $40,000 a unit, you know, in Texas. You know, those same deals are now, you know, $60,000 to $70,000 per unit. That type of property is going to be a C-class deal in a B-class area that's had some renovation done to it. Probably half of the units have been renovated, which means that there's still some meat on the bone for you. If you want to come in as a value-add investor and renovate the other half of the units, maybe add some additional amenities, maybe add a barbecue area or a playground for the kids or a dog park, you know, something like that, you know, those types of opportunities are still going to exist for you with that type of deal. Things that will allow you to raise rents and the income even more.
Mark, have you ever added solar to any of your properties?
I have not. Although on my 64 unit, I did talk with a guy that specialized in solar. We never moved forward on it. But the way I understood it is there were all sorts of, you know, rebates and incentives at the, you know, I think it was at the county level or maybe at the state level that you can get for doing that type of thing. I think it's a lot more common on maybe B+ and A-class properties, you know, and at the same time too, you're really looking at the common areas,
right?
You know, when you're already sub-metered, you know, but you know, I never moved forward on that. I think that's a great concept because when it comes to multifamily, your objectives are really clear. You want to increase income and decrease expenses, and that's simply because the value of your property is affected by your net operating income. If you increase your net operating income, you're going to force the appreciation of your property. That's something different than with residential, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah, and so I love doing things like that, like solar. You know what I did do though, Thomas, was I implemented a water conservation plan.
That's interesting.
And I bet this is something that's really important in California as well because water is so scarce, right?
Absolutely.
We're coming up on 1 year now since doing the water conservation, and we've saved over 2 million gallons of water.
Wow.
At the same time, we didn't just do what was right for the environment, but we also were able to reduce the amount of water, the bill that we were forwarding on to our residents. So our residents have a lower water bill, but at the same time, I'm able to bill back a larger percentage of my water. So it was really a win for the environment, a win for my residents, and a win for me.
Yeah, that's an awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, and I'm kind of taking you off topic here, but I noticed I did some due diligence on your portfolios, and you invested in condos at one point.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people here that hesitate to do that because of the HOA fees and things like that. Could you speak on your condo investing?
I love condos. I love townhomes.
Tell me why.
The reason why is because I get, if everything else is the same, right, between a condo and like a single family home, I get a better return post-tax on condos than anything else.
How's that work?
Well, we all know about depreciation, right? Depreciation expense and, phantom expense, as it's sometimes referred to.
Right.
With a single family home, there's a general rule of thumb, that you can only depreciate the value of the structure. You can't depreciate the land.
Right.
When you buy a single family home, a certain percentage, let's just call it like a 75-25. Is that pretty common in California as well?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Okay. So if you buy a property for $100,000, you can depreciate, as a general rule of thumb, $75,000 of that acquisition over 27 and a half years.
Right.
Right. Well, with a condo or a townhome, there's a much smaller amount of land associated with your acquisition price.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, as a general rule of thumb, you can depreciate a larger percentage of your acquisition price. Now, by the way, I am not a CPA.
Right.
I am in no position to advise anyone on this. Okay. But I'm telling you what my experience has been. So because I can depreciate a larger percentage of my acquisition price, I get a better return post-tax than I would on a single family home. Now, I'll say that the fear of HOAs is real. Okay. HOAs, there's good ones and there's bad ones out there. And when you're doing your due diligence, you have to look at the HOAs. You have to look at their bylaws. You have to look at their rules and regulations. You have to look at how much reserves they have. That's huge.
Yep.
If you run into an HOA that doesn't have any reserves, I would be afraid, be very, very afraid, because that means a special assessment's on its way. They're maybe not, getting enough to cover the annual expenses, and you're probably going to see higher HOA fees in the near future.
Yep.
But the truth is that if you have a good HOA, someone that has a good amount of reserves in place, and the community is clean, and things like that, they don't have a huge loss run on their insurance policy. That's another thing I'd look at.
That's a good point. Yep.
Then you actually have a partner in your property.
Right.
A silent partner.
Right.
Someone that
Hopefully.
doesn't. Yeah, exactly. And the truth is too that because the HOA typically handles everything outside.
Right.
The common area, including the roofs, and painting the exterior and stuff like that. You're only responsible for what's inside your four walls. So there's really just not a whole lot that can go wrong with your property. As long as you maintain your inside walls, there's just not a whole lot that can go wrong with it.
Yep, I agree.
Well, it's in a way you state, not to be disparaging because you're a very sophisticated investor, but you just state the 101 of investing, because fundamentally what you just said is because a lot of people got this not totally based on facts opinion about that particular sector. That's why you're investing in it, because you got less competition. Because there's less competition, you can get a better return. But
Sure.
you got to do your due diligence. You got to understand what you're getting involved with. That's what you just really said, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say, I said this earlier, right? There's so many different ways to make money in real estate.
Mhm.
I mean, there's commercial retail, there's commercial warehouses, there's office complexes, there's residential, there's multifamily, there's land, and stuff like that. There's water rights, and mineral rights and things like that.
Storage units.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many different ways to make money.
It's funny that you said about water rights. There's a little saying in Nevada, and it goes like this, Mark: beers for drinking, waters for fighting.
And that is true. And that is true.
That is really very true. Rob, Mark, we're coming to the end of the interview. Obviously, you came on and it's been a fascinating discussion, and I think we'll have you back at some time to continue if you're up for it.
Sure.
But obviously you came on the podcast. What can we do for you, and what can our listeners do for you? Is there anything that we can help you with?
Well, hey, I'll tell you what. Please, by all means, visit my website, luxmana.com. I have a blog out there, that people can read if you're interested in following me, or, maybe I share some things that I've learned along my journey. But I'll tell you what, as a way of saying thank you to everyone for, listening to the interview, I would like to make a free gift available. If you go to luxmana.com/mailright, so that's luxmana.com/mail-right. I have out there a paper that I wrote called 10 Not So Obvious Ways to Boost Your Multifamily Property NOI. Now, if you're a real estate broker that's maybe interested in doing a larger multifamily deal, you're going to need to learn how to speak the language. If you're an investor that's looking to invest in multifamily, you might find this useful. And if you're already an existing multifamily investor, hey, maybe there's something that I learned along the way that I share in this paper that you might be able to benefit from. But definitely, please, by all means, go out and check that out. And thanks again for the opportunity, guys.
Oh, it's been fascinating, Mark, and we will have that link in the show notes, and we'll be getting those up probably in tomorrow or the next day, folks. And we normally have the podcast up on Wednesdays or Thursdays. So in the next couple of days, you'll be listening to this, folks, and the show notes should be up. Mark, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thomas, how can people get hold of you as well?
Sure. Well, first, I want to thank Mark also. I really enjoyed our conversation. I could have gone another hour. You are speaking my language. My name is Thomas J. Nelson. I'm a realtor here residentially in San Diego. You can reach me at thomasjnelsonrealtor.com. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And Jonathan, how about you? How do people reach you?
It's quite easy, folks. Basically, email me at Jonathan, JONATHAN, at mail-right.com, or go to the MailRight Twitter feed. I'm normally on there. Check it once a day, and I'll comment on other people's. Give us feedback about the show. That would be really appreciated. Yeah. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. Please go to Mark's website. It's got plenty of resources, and like I say, we'll have that link in the notes that go with the show, which is on the MailRight website. And we'll be back next week. We're hopefully with another guest that will inform you and hopefully give you information that will make you a much better real estate agent in 2017. We'll see you next week. Bye, folks.
Thanks for listening, guys.